Welcome to today's custom-tailored deep dive. We're really thrilled you were joining us today
We definitely are.
because we are looking at something that exists so massively in the cultural consciousness that it can be, genuinely difficult to see it with fresh eyes.
Right, it's almost impossible to untangle the original text from all the adaptations.
Exactly. So today, we are undertaking an in-depth exploration of the early chapters, specifically chapters 1 through 24 of Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice.
But we have a very specific mission today.
We do. We are not approaching this as a standard, polite drawing room romance. We aren't here for the Empire waist gowns or the gentle teacup clanking.
No, definitely not.
Instead, we are pairing the novel's text, which we have courtesy of Project Gutenberg, with a highly analytical and honestly provocative preface written by the legendary literary critic George Saintsbury.
And that is exactly our aim for this conversation. Our mission for this deep dive is to aggressively peel back the layers of this text. We are going to unpack the razor-sharp social satire, the really meticulous psychological realism, and the unsparing, often terrifying economic realities that are operating just beneath the surface.
Beneath the ballroom dances and the muddy country lane walks.
Spot on. Through Saintsbury's critical lens, we are going to discover precisely why this text is fundamentally a masterclass in observing human behavior and social survival.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because I think for a lot of people, Pride and Prejudice has been softened by centuries of adaptations,
Oh, absolutely. It's been smoothed out into this comforting love story.
Right. But when you actually read these first 24 chapters, it is biting.
It really is.
It is intensely observant, and frequently it is incredibly harsh. The narrator is not a gentle romantic. She is a merciless observer.
Yes.
And that brings us to our first major framing device, which is George Saintsbury's critical preface. So who is Saintsbury, and why does his specific perspective change how we read Austen?
What's fascinating here is the distinction Saintsbury makes right at the beginning of his essay regarding how people actually consume literature.
Okay.
He borrows a concept from Walt Whitman, dividing readers into two distinct camps.
I love this part.
Right. So, first, there are those who love a book by allowance.
Meaning they appreciate it because convention dictates they should.
Exactly. It is part of the established canon, it sits on the shelf of great books, and they respect it out of a sense of cultural duty.
Like eating your literary vegetables.
Precisely. And then there are those who love a book with personal love. Saintsbury argues that the people who revere Jane Austen, the Janites, as he calls them, fall fiercely into this second category.
They possess a deeply personal, almost protective affection for her work.
Yes, it's a very intimate relationship with the text.
And he makes a rather sweeping claim right out of the gate, doesn't he?
He really does.
Even among the most dedicated Austen scholars who might argue that, say, Emma is technically more sophisticated, or that Persuasion is more emotionally resonant.
Saintsbury unhesitatingly declares Pride and Prejudice to be her quintessential work.
And the reasoning he provides for why it stands above the rest is rooted in its unique chronology, right?
Yes, the timeline is key. He points out that this book was initially drafted very early in Austen's life, around 1796.
When she was barely 21 years old.
Right. It was originally titled First Impressions.
Which is such a good title.
It is. But after being rejected by a publisher, the manuscript basically sat in a drawer for over a decade.
Wow.
Austen finally returned to it, revised it extensively in her middle life, and published it in 1813.
So it's this hybrid text.
Exactly. Saintsbury suggests that this specific elongated timeline is the architectural secret of the novel.
It yields a rare synthesis.
Yes. You have the vigorous, almost rebellious projection of youth, that sharp 21-year-old energy that wants to skewer authority figures, interlocking flawlessly with the measured structural revision of a mature artist in her late 30s.
The text possesses both the audacity of youth and the architectural precision of experience.
You couldn't say it better.
And speaking of audacity, Saintsbury offers a comparison that feels genuinely startling the first time you encounter it.
The Swift comparison.
Yes. Because when modern audiences think of Austen's humor, they tend to think of it as mild.
Gentle irony.
Right. And Saintsbury acknowledges that she shares the demureness of someone like the 18th century essayist Joseph Addison.
But he explicitly and forcefully compares her humor to the savage delight of Jonathan Swift.
We were talking about the Jonathan Swift who wrote A Modest Proposal.
Right. Saintsbury says Austen takes an insatiable and ruthless delight in roasting and cutting up a fool.
Roasting and cutting up a fool. That is so visceral.
It is a profound observation because it demands that we reframe how we view her character work. Critics have historically, occasionally, accused Austen of being cynical.
Pointing to how coldly she treats her more foolish characters.
Exactly, but Saintsbury vigorously defends this perceived cynicism.
How so?
He argues that the word is entirely misapplied if we use it as a pejorative.
Right.
If cynicism means simply perceiving the other side of things, or possessing a clear-eyed sense of the accepted hells beneath polite society.
The accepted hells beneath. I love that phrase.
It's brilliant. Or being deeply conscious that human motives are almost always mixed and self-serving.
Right.
If that is cynicism, then anyone who refuses to live in a fool's paradise is a cynic.
She refuses to pretend that people are purely motivated.
Never.
She observes the greed, the vanity, the sheer absurdity of the people in this country village, and she takes an Epicurean delight in dissecting them.
Saintsbury actually notes that she puts her fools and mean persons at work just to watch the machinery of their vanity grind away.
It is less like a romance novelist dreaming up a hero, and more like a behavioral ecologist observing microbes in a petri dish.
Which segues seamlessly into Saintsbury's secondary defense of Austen, which is the scope of her work.
The miniature painter analogy.
Yes. For over a century, critics have exhausted metaphors, trying to reconcile the immensity of her literary achievement with the narrowness of her field.
Because she writes about, 3 or 4 families in Country Village?
That is the entirety of her canvas.
Yeah.
But Saintsbury deploys the analogy of a miniature painter. And he doesn't mean a maker of cheap trinkets. He means a master, like Hans Memling or Jean-Louis Ernest Meissonier.
Right.
He argues that if her world is a microcosm, the cosmic quality of it is just as eminent as the littleness.
It is the premise that by looking microscopically at something very small, you can map the entire universe.
Exactly. Saintsbury points out that her myriad, trivial, unforced strokes build up the picture like magic.
And he provides these incredibly specific examples from the text.
Yes, he does.
He highlights the detail of Mr. Darcy bringing his coffee cup back to the table himself, or the highly specific, irritating way Mrs. Bennet stirs the fire when she is anxious.
He compares these tiny physical actions to Swift's detail in Gulliver's Travels, where a character is described as being taller by the breadth of my nail.
It is that relentless exactitude that makes the world feel hyper-real.
And if we connect this to the broader way you, as a listener, consume information, it asks you to consider how frequently we judge the importance of art or reporting by its sheer scale rather than its precision.
We have been conditioned to think a narrative must involve the fate of nations to be significant.
Right. But Austen demonstrates that by applying a microscopic Swiftian lens to a few families in Hertfordshire, you can reveal universal truths about human vanity, economic desperation, and the mechanics of social power.
So, with Saintsbury's critical lens firmly in place, keeping our eyes open for that underlying ruthlessness and that microscopic exactitude, let's dive into the actual text of the first 24 chapters.
Let's do it.
We begin with Section 2, the marriage market and first impressions, covering chapters 1 through 6. And we must begin with the most famous opening line in the English language.
It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife.
That sentence is a masterclass in ironic economic calculation.
It really is. On a superficial reading, it sounds like a pleasant, romantic proverb.
But Austen immediately undercuts the romance in the very next sentence.
She writes that however little known the feelings or views of such a man may be on his first entering a neighborhood, this truth is so deeply fixed in the minds of the surrounding families that he is considered the rightful property of some one or other of their daughters.
The rightful property.
It transforms a romantic ideal into a predatory real estate transaction.
The man isn't viewed as a human being. He is an asset to be acquired.
Exactly.
And the asset they are attempting to acquire is Mr. Charles Bingley, who has just leased Netherfield Park.
He is young, he is single, and he possesses an income of £4,000 or £5,000 a year.
For context, that is a massive sum, generating significant wealth without him having to lift a finger.
Right. The arrival of this fortune throws the Bennet household into a state of nervous agitation, and it immediately establishes the contrasting parental dynamics that drive the plot.
We are introduced to Mrs. Bennet, a woman of mean understanding, little information, and uncertain temper, whose entire business in life is to get her 5 daughters married.
And just posed against her is Mr. Bennet,
who deflects his wife's hysteria with a wall of sarcastic, detached amusement.
The dialogue between them in that opening chapter is a brilliant exhibition of character.
Mrs. Bennet is frantically demanding he go visit Bingley to secure an introduction.
And Mr. Bennet is deliberately obtuse. He teases her relentlessly, suggesting she should go herself because she is still handsome enough that Bingley might prefer her to the daughters.
Now, Saintsbury actually extends a defense to Mr. Bennet here.
He does. He categorizes Mrs. Bennet as a quite irreclaimable fool and argues that for a man of sense who is permanently bound in a marriage to such a woman, there is literally no intellectual escape route other than the ironic.
If he did not laugh at her absurdities, the reality of his situation would crush him.
Exactly.
But I think we have to push back on Mr. Bennet just a bit, don't we?
We definitely should.
Yes, he provides the reader with immense comedic relief. But his ironic helplessness, as Saintsbury phrases it, masks a devastating failure of parental duty.
That's the real tragedy of it.
He retreats to his library to mock his family, while his foolish wife is left to fight a terrifying, solitary economic battle.
Because the underlying reality is that the Bennet girls have virtually no dowry.
Right. If they do not marry, they face genuine destitution upon his death.
Mrs. Bennet's methods are utterly lacking in decorum, but she is the only person in the house actively attempting to solve the existential threat facing her children.
That is an astute point. The comedy of the Bennet household is layered directly over the terror of poverty.
And that underlying economic engine is what propels them to the Meryton Assembly.
The local public ball.
This is the proving ground. The neighborhood gets its first look at the Netherfield party.
Bingley is universally embraced immediately. He is lively, he dances every dance, he is entirely unpretentious.
But then the attention shifts to his friend, Mr. Fitzwilliam Darcy.
Darcy is reported to possess £10,000 a year, double Bingley's wealth.
Furthermore, his estate, Pemberley, represents entrenched generational aristocratic power, whereas Bingley's money is from the newer merchant class.
For the first half hour of the ball, Darcy is the most admired man in the room.
But the social tide turns with remarkable speed.
The tide turns because he fundamentally rejects the social contract of the assembly.
Yes. He declines to be introduced to anyone outside his own party. He dances only with Bingley's sisters. He paces the room projecting an aura of intense disgust.
The neighborhood swiftly reaches a consensus. He is the proudest, most disagreeable man in the world.
And this leads to the inciting incident of the narrative.
Bingley, ever the golden retriever, attempts to cajole Darcy into dancing.
Specifically pointing out Elizabeth Bennet, who is sitting out because there are not enough men to partner the women.
Darcy looks at her, catches her eye, and delivers a coldly fatal insult.
She is tolerable, but not handsome enough to tempt me.
It is a staggering breach of etiquette.
And it reveals the core of Darcy's psychology at this stage.
Bingley is ductile. He is eager to be pleased by his environment and to mold himself to the joy of the room.
Darcy is hyper-fastidious and intensely conscious of his social superiority. He views this rural assembly, filled with minor gentry and professionals, as actively contaminating.
He wields his pride defensively to keep people at a distance.
But Elizabeth overhears the insult.
And how she processes this humiliation is vital to understanding her character.
She does not shrink away or weep.
She immediately takes the story and turns it into a comedic anecdote for her friends.
She weaponizes her wit to protect her wounded pride.
It's an incredible defense mechanism.
It is, and this specific interaction sets up the central philosophical debate of the book,
which Austen assigns, rather tellingly, to the pedantic middle sister, Mary Bennet.
The morning after the ball, while the family is dissecting Darcy's behavior, Mary delivers a heavily moralistic speech distinguishing between pride and vanity.
She asserts that pride relates to our internal opinion of ourselves, whereas vanity is an obsession with what we would have others think of us.
It is a subtle distinction, but a critical one.
Darcy is proud. He is completely indifferent to the Meryton villagers calling him disagreeable because his self-worth is internally validated by his immense status.
Mrs. Bennet, conversely, is consumed by vanity. Her entire mood is dictated by how her family is publicly perceived.
And Elizabeth sits precisely at the intersection of those two flaws.
Exactly. She takes immense pride in her own perceptive abilities. She believes she is a flawless judge of character, which is exactly what Darcy's dismissal insults.
But she also harbors enough vanity to allow that initial insult to permanently calcify into prejudice against him.
It is a meticulously constructed psychological trap.
And while Elizabeth is sharpening her wit against Darcy, we are introduced to her closest friend, Charlotte Lucas.
Charlotte introduces a deeply pragmatic, unsentimental worldview that acts as a stark counter-narrative to Elizabeth's romantic ideals.
Charlotte is a fascinating character study. She is 27 years old, which in Regency terms places her perilously close to the permanent status of spinster.
Her assessment of Jane and Bingley's budding courtship is chillingly rational.
She advises Elizabeth that Jane needs to aggressively show more affection than she genuinely feels in order to secure Bingley.
Because, in Charlotte's words, happiness in marriage is entirely a matter of chance.
Charlotte contends that it is actually disadvantageous to know the flaws of your future partner beforehand.
Her philosophy is to secure the financial establishment first and hope for toleration later.
It is a worldview born of necessity.
Charlotte's dialogue establishes the baseline reality of the 19th century marriage market. It is an economic crucible.
Elizabeth operates under the psychological luxury of holding out for intellectual respect and romantic love, but Charlotte recognizes that for a woman without a fortune, marriage is the only mechanism for survival.
That economic and class friction brings us to Section 3.
Muddy Petticoats and the Accomplished Woman, covering chapters 7 through 12.
The contrast between these differing social stations ignites when Jane is invited to dine at Netherfield by Bingley's sisters, Caroline and Mrs. Hurst.
Mrs. Bennet sees an opportunity and executes a stroke of absolute Machiavellian calculation.
She really does.
She forbids Jane from using the family carriage, forcing her to go on horseback, fully aware that a rainstorm is approaching.
Her explicit goal is that Jane will be rained upon, ruining her clothes, and forcing the Bingleys to offer her a bed for the night.
It is a tactical deployment of the elements.
And it succeeds too well. Jane is soaked, catches a severe cold, and is bedridden at Netherfield.
This triggers one of the most vividly drawn scenes in the early novel. Elizabeth is plagued by anxiety for her sister.
Because the carriage is unavailable, she decides to walk the 3 miles across the country, cutting through fields and jumping over stiles, to reach Netherfield.
She arrives with a glowing complexion from the physical exertion, but her stockings are dirty and her petticoat is heavily coated in mud.
We have to analyze the physical space of Netherfield here.
Yes, because the drawing room becomes a battleground of class signifiers.
To the Bingley sisters, Elizabeth's muddy petticoat is a visual manifestation of everything they despise about her.
Caroline Bingley weaponizes it, stating it shows an abominable sort of conceited independence, almost country town indifference to decorum.
The Bingley sisters are essentially acting as social border guards.
They constantly mock the Bennets for their low connections. Specifically, an uncle who is a country attorney and another who lives in Cheapside, the commercial trading district of London.
What is crucial to understand about the Bingley sisters' snobbery is that it stems from insecurity.
Their own fortune was acquired through trade relatively recently.
Right. They do not have the ancient landed gentry blood of a Darcy.
Therefore, they are hyper-vigilant about policing the boundaries of elite society.
They are desperate to ensure that wealth only marries wealth, a protectionist strategy we still observe in modern elite circles when defining cultural fit or exclusive networking.
To them, Elizabeth tracking mud into Netherfield is a literal invasion of the lower classes.
Yet the male reaction to her arrival is entirely different.
Bingley barely registers the mud. He is simply concerned for her sister and thinks Elizabeth looks remarkably healthy.
Darcy, however, is undergoing a profound internal crisis.
He agrees conceptually with the sisters. He's repelled by her family's lack of decorum and their Cheapside connections.
Yet he is entirely captivated by the brilliancy that the exercise has given to her dark eyes.
Saintsbury points out how meticulously Austen charts this shift.
Darcy moves from his initial dismissal of her as barely tolerable to being involuntarily drawn to the easy playfulness of her manners.
This internal division within Darcy sets the stage for the crackling tension of the evening drawing room scenes.
While Jane rests upstairs, Elizabeth is subjected to the company of Darcy and the Bingley sisters.
Caroline Bingley, sensing Darcy's shifting attention, initiates a debate regarding what constitutes a truly accomplished woman.
Caroline dictates an exhausting, impossible syllabus.
She declares a woman must have a thorough knowledge of music, singing, drawing, dancing, and modern languages.
Furthermore, she insists the woman must possess a specific, indefinable elegance in her air and her manner of walking.
It's an exclusionary list designed to ensure only women with the immense wealth required for endless tutors can qualify.
And then Darcy interjects.
He agrees with Caroline, but adds a final crushing requirement. To all this, she must yet add something more substantial in the improvement of her mind by extensive reading.
It is a vital addition.
Earlier that same evening, Caroline had actively mocked Elizabeth for choosing to read a book rather than join a card game.
By prioritizing reading, Darcy is essentially subverting Caroline's argument and quietly validating Elizabeth's intellectualism.
Exactly. But does Elizabeth accept this olive branch?
Not at all.
She actively challenges him. She points out the sheer absurdity of combining all those superficial aesthetic skills with genuine intellectual capacity.
She boldly states she has never seen such a woman in her life, uniting capacity, taste, application, and elegance all in one person.
How does she navigate that trap?
By refusing to play by their definitions. She exposes their standard not as a measure of a woman's worth, but as an exclusionary tactic.
Her refusal to be intimidated is thrilling.
And Darcy realizes he is in serious danger of falling for her, which deeply alarms his snobbery.
He decides to test the waters. One evening, while Caroline is playing a lively Scottish air on the piano, Darcy approaches Elizabeth and asks if she feels a great inclination to dance a reel.
Elizabeth recognizes the trap.
She knows he expects her to eagerly accept, thereby giving him the opportunity to disdain her rural tastes.
And she outmaneuvers him completely.
She informs him that she knows his scheme, that he only asked so he could have the pleasure of despising her taste.
She says, I have therefore made up my mind to tell you that I do not want to dance a reel at all, and now despise me if you dare.
By denying him the dance, she denies him his premeditated contempt.
As Saintsbury notes, Elizabeth does not exhibit the nasty niceness or the speechless deference that every other woman displays in Darcy's presence.
She meets him as an intellectual combatant.
He has likely never experienced a woman speaking to him without an agenda of flattery, and it leaves him utterly bewitched.
The dynamic between them is electric. But just as Jane recovers and the sisters return to their home, a completely different kind of threat arrives at the Bennet family's front door.
Which brings us to Section 4. The Immortal Mr. Collins, covering chapters 13 through 15.
Earlier, we touched on the fact that the Bennet girls face economic ruin. The mechanism of that ruin is a legal instrument called an entailment. Let's explain the gravity of this.
An entailment was a legal device utilized by the landed gentry to ensure an estate remained intact and within the family line, rather than being subdivided among various heirs.
In the case of the Longbourn estate, the entailment dictates that it must pass to the closest male heir.
Because Mr. Bennet has 5 daughters and no sons, upon his death, the house, the land, and the primary income do not go to his wife or children.
They go to a distant cousin.
This means the Bennet women will be effectively evicted from their own home. It is a sword of Damocles hanging over the entire family.
And the man holding that sword is Mr. William Collins, a 25-year-old clergyman.
Saintsbury's analysis of this character borders on reverence.
He considers Mr. Collins a towering achievement of comedic writing, far surpassing the character work of Addison and rivaling the absolute best of Jonathan Swift.
Before Collins even sets foot in the house, his character is flawlessly delineated by a letter he sends to Mr. Bennet.
The letter is a masterpiece of heavy, servile self-importance.
He ostensibly writes to apologize for being the heir who will render them homeless, but he does so in the most pompous, patronizing tone imaginable.
Heavily padding his prose with boasts about his patroness, the aristocratic Lady Catherine de Bourgh.
When he arrives in person, the physical description matches the prose. He is a tall, heavy-looking young man with formal manners.
His grand design in visiting Longbourn is to make amends for inheriting the estate by selecting one of the Bennet daughters as his wife.
He views this as an act of supreme Christian charity.
Yet his selection process is entirely transactional.
He arrives, inspects Jane, decides her beauty is sufficient, and mentally earmarks her.
The following morning, Mrs. Bennet privately pulls him aside to hint that Jane is likely soon to be engaged to Mr. Bingley.
Austen writes that in the time it takes Mrs. Bennet to literally stir the fire, Collins pivots entirely and reassigns his matrimonial intentions to Elizabeth simply because she is the next oldest.
It is unadulterated materialism cloaked in clerical piety.
He views the daughters with the exact same evaluative gaze he applies to the furniture in the dining room. They are future assets to be managed.
And his obsession with Lady Catherine de Bourgh is pathology.
He continually forces the conversation toward her immense wealth, recounting the cost of her chimney piece and bragging that he spends his leisure hours arranging unstudied, elegant compliments to deploy in her presence.
Saintsbury calls Collins the imperishable embodiment of 18th century Philistinism and groveling respect for rank.
Saintsbury also makes a crucial textual connection here regarding Austen's development as a writer.
He points out that Austen attempted an earlier, unsuccessful iteration of the Collins archetype in her novel Sense and Sensibility, with the character of John Dashwood.
Dashwood possesses the formality, the underbreeding, and the mercenary meanness, but the portrait feels somewhat static.
Collins, however, vibrates with life.
Why? Because his immense absurd comedy is perfectly counterbalanced by the very real terror of what he represents.
Right. We laugh when he corners the flighty teenage Lydia and attempts to read aloud from Fordyce's sermons, a deeply conservative, tedious book of moral instruction for young women, which Lydia completely ignores.
It's hilarious. But the comedy is a veneer over a grim reality.
Objectively speaking, his offer of marriage is a golden lifeboat for Elizabeth.
If she marries him, she secures the estate. She guarantees that her mother and sisters will not starve or freeze when her father dies.
His absolute absurdity is what makes him so highly dangerous to her autonomy.
She has to choose between her own intellectual survival and her family's physical survival.
And precisely when Elizabeth is grappling with the looming, suffocating threat of Mr. Collins, Austen introduces a new variable that entirely disrupts Elizabeth's judgment.
This brings us to Section 5, Wickham's masterful manipulation, covering chapters 15 through 17.
A militia regiment arrives to take up winter quarters in Meryton.
For the listener, it's important to understand that a militia in this era wasn't deploying to a war zone. They were stationed in towns, acting as a massive social hub, bringing dozens of young, single officers in bright red coats into the local society.
And among them is a new recruit, Mr. George Wickham.
Wickham's introduction is flawlessly calibrated to exploit Elizabeth's current vulnerabilities.
She is actively repelled by Collins, she harbors deep resentment toward Darcy, and suddenly Wickham appears.
He is exceptionally handsome, possesses an immediate easy charm, and is universally captivating.
Austen frames his intersection with Darcy with incredible cinematic tension.
Elizabeth is walking through the streets of Meryton with Wickham and her sisters when Darcy and Bingley ride past on horseback.
Darcy and Wickham lock eyes.
Austen notes that one man turns white, the other turns red. Darcy barely touches his hat in greeting. Wickham touches his.
It is a silent collision of intense, unresolved history.
Elizabeth's curiosity is immediately inflamed.
A few days later, at a supper party hosted by her Aunt Phillips, Wickham maneuvers himself into a seat next to Elizabeth.
What follows is a masterclass in calculated emotional manipulation.
Wickham does not simply dump his grievances onto her. He probes.
He asks polite questions about how long Darcy has been in the area, and he waits.
He waits until Elizabeth vocalizes her extreme distaste for Darcy.
Once she declares Darcy to be very disagreeable, Wickham knows he has a receptive audience.
He feeds her a narrative perfectly designed to validate her existing prejudices.
He tells her a tragic, incredibly detailed backstory.
He claims he was the godson and favorite companion of the late Mr. Darcy.
The elder Darcy, according to Wickham, had promised to provide for him by leaving him a valuable church living in his will.
A church living wasn't just a job. It was an estate that generated a guaranteed, lifelong income for a clergyman.
But Wickham alleges the current Mr. Darcy, driven by vicious jealousy of his father's affection for Wickham, flagrantly ignored the will and cruelly refused to give Wickham the living,
forcing Wickham to seek his fortune in the militia.
It is a devastating accusation.
And Elizabeth, a woman who prides herself on her astute observation and her piercing judgment, swallows the story whole.
She does not cross-examine him. She does not question the profound impropriety of a man she just met sharing deeply personal, unverified grievances about a prominent gentleman.
Why? Because the story feels good to believe.
It aligns with her pre-existing emotional state.
She literally exclaims, "He deserves to be publicly disgraced."
It is a textbook demonstration of confirmation bias. Wickham's manipulation is effective only because Elizabeth's own pride does half the work for him.
When Elizabeth later relays this shocking information to Jane, we see the contrast in their analytical methods.
Jane, whose default state is immense grace, gently plays devil's advocate.
She argues that there must be a misunderstanding, that no man of common humanity could act so disgracefully, and that both men must have been deceived in some way.
Elizabeth finds Jane's relentless neutrality maddening. She thinks Jane is being hopelessly naive.
But the profound irony that Austen is layering here is that Jane's hesitation is actually far closer to the objective truth than Elizabeth's confident, immediate condemnation.
Saintsbury makes a brilliant observation about the construction of Wickham's character.
He refers to Wickham as a sketch and drab.
Austen could have easily written him as a standard, oily Don Juan figure, a mustache-twirling villain.
Instead, she makes him perfectly respectable, polite, and seemingly injured.
By withholding obvious villainy, Austen makes him infinitely more dangerous, both to Elizabeth and to the reader.
This web of misjudgments, pride, and manipulation culminates in a spectacular public disaster.
We arrive at Section 6, the Netherfield Ball, covering Chapter 18.
This chapter is an agonizing study in secondhand embarrassment.
Elizabeth arrives at Netherfield, fully anticipating a romantic evening dancing with Wickham.
But he is conspicuously absent.
He has deliberately left town on minor business to avoid being in the same room as Mr. Darcy.
Elizabeth is immediately derailed, furious at Darcy for supposedly driving Wickham away.
Her misery is compounded by her dance card.
She is forced to dance the first 2 dances with Mr. Collins.
Austen describes it as a dance of mortification.
Collins is solemn, awkward, constantly moving in the wrong direction, and apologizing profusely, drawing everyone's attention to their lack of grace.
When she is finally released from him, her relief is shattered when Mr. Darcy suddenly materializes and asks her for a dance.
She is so thoroughly startled by the request that she accidentally agrees before she can formulate a refusal.
What follows is an intense psychological duel on the dance floor.
They begin by standing in complete, suffocating silence.
Elizabeth, deciding to punish him, forces the conversation.
They engage in a series of veiled, sharp verbal parries.
She intentionally probes at his sore spot, mentioning Wickham, and suggesting that Wickham has lost Darcy's friendship in a manner he will suffer from all his life.
Darcy's demeanor darkens into a deeper shade of hauteur.
He doesn't stoop to defend himself against the accusation.
Instead, Elizabeth throws his own previous statements back at him, reminding him that he once said his resentment, once created, is unappeasable.
And Darcy unflinchingly confirms it. "I am," he states firmly.
It is an interaction defined by mutual misapprehension.
But the awkwardness of the dance is merely a prelude to the true catastrophe of the Netherfield Ball.
The real tragedy is the systematic public destruction of the Bennet family's reputation, playing out in real time, with Darcy observing every moment.
It is agonizing to read.
At the supper table, Mrs. Bennet speaks at maximum volume so loudly that Darcy, seated directly across the table, cannot help but hear her.
Bragging about her absolute certainty that Jane will soon marry Bingley.
She loudly calculates how Bingley's wealth will throw her younger daughters into the path of other rich men.
Then, Mary Bennet decides it is her moment to shine.
When a piano is opened, Mary eagerly volunteers and sings 2 incredibly difficult, affected songs, entirely unaware that her voice is terrible and that the room is politely mocking her.
Mr. Bennet eventually has to publicly intervene, telling her, "You have delighted us long enough," humiliating her in front of the entire assembly.
The disastrous behavior cascades.
Mr. Collins, operating under a warped sense of clerical duty, decides he must introduce himself to Mr. Darcy simply because Darcy is the nephew of his patroness, Lady Catherine.
Elizabeth desperately attempts to stop him, explaining that Darcy will view an unintroduced clergyman addressing him as an impertinent freedom.
Collins dismisses her advice entirely.
When he approaches, Darcy looks at him with unrestrained wonder and sheer contempt.
Meanwhile, the youngest sisters, Lydia and Kitty, are running wildly around the room, exhausting themselves with completely unrefined, boisterous behavior.
If we pause to analyze the stakes here, what does this public display actually mean for Jane and Elizabeth?
It means social and economic bankruptcy.
In a society where family reputation is the singular currency a woman possesses in the marriage market, the actions of Mrs. Bennet, Mary, Kitty, Lydia, and Mr. Collins are actively bankrupting Jane and Elizabeth's future prospects.
Austen specifically focuses on Darcy's reaction. He watches Mrs. Bennet with a composed and steady gravity.
That is the look of a powerful man realizing that legally and socially binding himself to this family would be an act of unmitigated self-sabotage.
The comedic elements of the scene are merely a thin veil over absolute disaster.
And the fallout from that disaster arrives the very next morning.
Section 7, Pragmatism versus Romance, the Dual Proposals and the Betrayal, covering chapters 19 through 24.
Following the ball, Mr. Collins proceeds with his plan. He requests a private audience with Elizabeth and delivers what must be the least romantic proposal ever recorded in English literature.
It is entirely devoid of affection.
He approaches the proposal as a business ledger.
He sequentially lists his reasons for marrying. First, to set a proper example as a clergyman. Second, to add to his personal comfort. And third, which he emphasizes as the most important, because Lady Catherine de Bourgh instructed him to do so.
But where the scene transitions from merely absurd to actively cruel is when he addresses Elizabeth's financial reality.
Yes, let's look at the specific language he uses.
He tells her he is perfectly aware of her lack of fortune. He explicitly reminds her that she will only inherit £1,000 in the 4%.
We have to explain that math because it's brutal.
If she has £1,000 invested in government bonds yielding 4%, her total independent income is £40 a year.
That is a starvation wage for a gentlewoman. It wouldn't even cover basic boarding.
Collins is actively rubbing her face in her poverty, suggesting that because she is so poor, she cannot afford to reject him, as she will never receive another offer.
It is aggressive, calculated negging.
Which makes Elizabeth's clear, absolute rejection of him so powerful.
She tells him no in no uncertain terms.
Yet Collins refuses to believe her.
He claims she is merely acting like an elegant female, playing hard to get, and that it is standard practice for women to reject a man 2 or 3 times before submitting.
She practically has to shout at him that she is a rational creature speaking the truth from her heart, not a coquettish caricature.
The rejection triggers an explosive parental showdown.
Mrs. Bennet is frantic. She threatens to entirely disown Elizabeth if she does not marry Collins.
But Mr. Bennet summons Elizabeth to his library and delivers perhaps his most famous line.
Your mother will never see you again if you do not marry Mr. Collins, and I will never see you again if you do.
He validates her intellect and supports her refusal, completely ignoring the fact that his support dooms his wife and daughters to future poverty.
But just as Elizabeth feels she has navigated her way out of the trap, Austen delivers a masterstroke of plot.
Charlotte Lucas, Elizabeth's pragmatic friend, quietly intercepts Mr. Collins.
Charlotte intentionally positions herself in the lane where she knows he will be walking, encourages his wounded ego, and within 24 hours accepts his proposal of marriage.
Elizabeth is staggered. She's utterly horrified.
She views Charlotte's decision as a moral degradation, unable to comprehend how her friend could sacrifice every better feeling merely for worldly advantage.
This represents the central ideological clash of the novel's first half.
We have Elizabeth's unyielding romantic idealism pitted against Charlotte's cold, calculating pragmatism.
Charlotte does not apologize for her choice. She tells Elizabeth plainly, "I am not romantic, you know. I never was. I ask only a comfortable home."
For a 27-year-old woman with no fortune and plain looks, marriage is not about love. It is a pleasantest preservative from want.
Elizabeth's worldview is shaken because beneath her horror, she must confront the fact that Charlotte's choice is fundamentally logical within their economic ecosystem.
And Charlotte is not the only force destabilizing Elizabeth's reality.
Almost simultaneously, the entire Netherfield party abruptly vacates Hertfordshire, retreating to London.
Caroline Bingley sends Jane a highly manipulative letter.
She informs Jane that they will not return for the entire winter.
More devastatingly, she heavily implies that her brother Charles is rapidly falling in love with Georgiana Darcy, Mr. Darcy's wealthy, highly connected younger sister.
Caroline weaponizes the language of intimate female friendship to completely dismantle Jane's hopes while keeping her own hands remarkably clean.
She writes extensively about her deep affection for Jane, but in the exact same paragraph states her fervent hope that her brother marries Miss Darcy to unite the two great estates.
Elizabeth's piercing judgment cuts right through the polite prose.
She instantly deduces that Caroline and Darcy are actively conspiring to separate Bingley from Jane, because the Bennet family's behavior at the ball proved they are socially unacceptable.
But Jane, true to her nature, refuses to recognize the malice.
She twists logic into knots, trying to believe that Caroline is merely deceived, that Bingley simply never loved her enough to begin with.
The shifting power dynamics here are profound.
Elizabeth has been proven wrong about Charlotte. She didn't truly understand her friend's core values or her desperation.
And Jane has been proven wrong about the inherent goodness of the Bingley sisters.
The foundational assumptions of both sisters are cracking under the immense pressure of class borders and economic vulnerability.
It is an incredibly intense sequence of chapters.
We began with what felt like a light, witty drawing room comedy, and we end chapter 24 immersed in a ruthless dissection of a marriage market where women are fighting, manipulating, and compromising their ideals for their literal survival.
To synthesize what we have unpacked today, we have observed the brilliant, volatile interplay of Darcy's protective, fastidious pride,
Elizabeth's reactive, blinding prejudice,
the sheer, unvarnished economic desperation of Mrs. Bennet and Charlotte Lucas,
and the devious, self-serving social maneuvering of George Wickham and Caroline Bingley.
Saintsbury's thesis holds true. Austen is not merely writing polite fiction. She is conducting a Swiftian dissection of human nature. She exposes the gears of the machine.
Exactly. She shows us the machinery of the society. And to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought that builds upon everything we've explored today, let's reconsider a character who is usually treated only as a punchline, Mary Bennet.
Saintsbury notes in his preface that Austen was unusually unsparing toward Mary, eventually dooming her in the family appendices to marry a mere clerk.
Austen provides her with no physical beauty, no sharp wit, and zero natural charm.
But if we examine Mary's actions through the lens of survival tactics, her constant, desperate quoting of heavy moral texts, her painful determination to sing complex songs at the Netherfield ball, a different picture emerges.
In a family ecosystem where Jane possesses ultimate beauty, Elizabeth possesses ultimate wit, and Lydia possesses wild, flirtatious energy, wasn't Mary's intense, grating pedantry her only logical survival strategy?
If she knew she could never compete on looks or charm, her attempt to mold herself into an accomplished intellectual, however unsuccessful and annoying it was to others, was her solitary attempt to carve out some form of value for herself in a ruthless market.
It makes you view her not just as a comedic punching bag, but as someone desperately trying to build a fortress out of books because she has no other weapons.
Think about the individuals in our own society today who attempt to aggressively intellectualize their way out of systems that are fundamentally stacked against them.
When you apply Saintsbury's lens of ruthless realism, it fundamentally changes how you read every single character in those early chapters.
It demands that we look closer. It forces you to evaluate every interaction, no matter how minor, as a negotiation for power and survival.
Well, that concludes our deep dive into the brilliant, muddy, and utterly unforgiving world of early Pride and Prejudice. Thank you so much for joining us on this exploration. We hope you walk away looking at the classic literature on your shelf with a sharp and entirely new perspective. Keep reading, keep questioning, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.